For decades, no one survived room 313. But when a little girl was wheeled in, and a dog with no name walked out of the snow, everything changed. In the heart of Montana's snow-laced wilderness, where pine trees lean like mourners and roads vanish under white silence, there stands a hospital almost forgotten by time. It's not on any major map. No glowing sign marks its presence. Locals call it Hollow Pines, but the staff, especially those who've worked the night shift long enough, know it for something else. Room 313. The hallway leading to it always seems colder than the rest. The lights flicker more often there. And most telling of all, nurses don't speak of it directly. They nod. They glance. They whisper. Patients assigned to room 313 rarely return, not because they were the sickest, but because something holds them. That's where Evie Marsh, 8 years old, was taken after the accident. A sheet of black ice, a guardrail that didn't hold. Her mother, Nora Leave, only by inches woke up to silence and sirens, and a daughter who no longer opened her eyes. All the standard rooms were filled. ICU was backed up. It wasn't a choice. Not really. Room 313 was the only space left. That's what the nurse said, with tight lips and lowered eyes. So they wheeled Evie in. Now she lay still beneath the humming machines, her small chest rising in shallow rhythm. Tubes curled like vines from her nose and arms. The bruises were fading, but she wasn't returning. Nora, once a veterinarian, once a woman of certainty, sat beside her daughter, wrapped in layers of hospital-issue fleece and months of grief. She hadn't gone home. Hadn't answered her phone in days. Hadn't spoken to her sister. Most nights, she just counted the beeping of machines like seconds left on a clock she couldn't see. She prayed, though she no longer believed. Not in God, not in medicine, not in the neat stories people tell themselves to sleep at night. She prayed because it was the only sound she could make that didn't feel like breaking. Sometimes, she wondered if room 313 knew, if it could feel her fear. Sometimes, it felt like the walls were leaning in, listening. Sometimes, the silence between the beeps stretched too long, and Nora would stop breathing just to hear if Evie still was. Outside, snow fell endlessly. Inside, room 313 held its breath. And Nora was starting to forget what light even felt like. On the third night, the snow fell heavier, thicker than the night before, like the sky was trying to bury the hospital in silence. Outside, the wind howled low against the windows. But inside room 313, everything had gone still. Nora sat with her chin on her chest, half asleep, one hand curled around Evie's. The machines blinked steady green and gold. Nothing had changed. Until it did. At precisely 2:41 a.m., something shifted in the hallway. Down at the far end, just past the motion-activated lights, a figure appeared. A dog. Large, silver and white, soaked from snow, his coat darkened by melt and time. No collar, no tag, just presence. The security feed later showed nothing. No open doors, no movement at all. But ask the staff who were there, and they'll all say the same thing. I didn't see him arrive. I just knew he was coming. As the dog stepped forward, each paw landing with silent certainty, something rippled through the hospital like a held breath. Nurses who should have stopped him felt their hands freeze mid-air. No one moved. But inside, they all heard it. Don't stop him. The dog reached the door of room 313. He paused, lifted his paw, tapped the tile 3 times, then walked in like he'd been there before. Nora stirred as the door creaked. At first, she blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. But then she saw him, tall, drenched, unmoving, sitting quietly beside Evie's bed. She should have screamed, should have called for help. But instead, she froze. Because the dog wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Evie, staring at her as if trying to reach something behind her closed eyelids. Not barking, not sniffing, just watching. And then, Evie's chest suddenly lifted deeper than before. Her fingers twitched. Her lips parted. And in a voice soft as snowfall, she whispered, "It found me." Nora gasped. The dog said nothing, but his eyes, still locked on the child, seemed to know. He had come for a reason. The presence of the dog sent a ripple through the hospital, not panic, more like disruption. Nurses exchanged glances. Orderlies whispered. And when the attending physician, Dr. Ramsey, stepped into room 313 just before dawn, the first thing he said was exactly what everyone expected. "There's a dog on the bed." His voice was clipped, confused. He didn't raise it, didn't move to touch the animal. He just stood at the threshold, staring at the wet fur and the steady brown eyes of a dog who wasn't supposed to be there. Nora stirred from her half-sleep. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "He didn't hurt her," she said. "He just came in." Dr. Ramsey exhaled through his nose and pinched the bridge of it. "We'll need to remove him. It's against policy. We don't allow—" But before he could finish, one of the older nurses, June, who'd worked there since before the new wing was built, stepped in behind him and said something quiet. Something final. "If he's staying, let him stay." Ramsey hesitated. Maybe it was the way June said it. Maybe it was the dog himself, sitting perfectly still, like a statue molded from storm clouds. But he didn't argue. He simply nodded once, turned, and left the room. From that point forward, no one tried to remove him. The staff needed something to call him, and it was the night shift janitor who named him Fenrir, after the great wolf of Norse myth said to devour gods and swallow darkness whole. "Seems like the kind of name he'd answer to," the janitor muttered, and surprisingly, the dog responded with a blink. They didn't put a tag on him, didn't try to feed him. Fenrir didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't bark. He just sat by Evie's side, night after night, like he was waiting for something no one else could see. But the change was real. Evie's vitals, which had held stubbornly flat for 3 days, began to rise. Her oxygen levels climbed, her heart rate found rhythm, her fingertips, once cool and bluish, returned to soft pink. Doctors hovered outside the glass, reading charts twice, triple-checking monitors. She was stable before, they said, but not like this. By morning, Evie's eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, like a curtain drawing back from a long-forgotten window, her eyes opened. Nora, still holding her hand, gasped. "Evie!" The girl blinked, as if adjusting to light after a long tunnel. And then, barely louder than breath, she whispered, "Mom, I'm hungry." Nora sobbed. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and immediate, like air, returning to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. She pressed her forehead to her daughter's and wept into her hair. Fenrir didn't move. He just watched, silent, still. His eyes soft now, like he'd seen this before. Outside the room, the medical team stood speechless. There were no explanations, no notes in textbooks, no protocols for this kind of return. So, eventually, they just stopped trying to explain it. They treated Evie, monitored her, fed her carefully, adjusted medications with shaking hands, but none of them dared say aloud what they all knew in their bones. The dog came, and the girl came back. At first, the staff thought it was coincidence how Fenrir always sat in the same spot after dark, just past the foot of the bed, between the IV stand and the far wall. But it wasn't the position that unsettled people. It was the direction he faced. Always the same corner, the upper left, shadowed by an overhanging cabinet and unreachable by any direct light. The fluorescent bulbs overhead barely grazed it, like the room itself was avoiding that space. And Fenrir? He would sit stone still, ears twitching, eyes unblinking, gazing into it like waiting for something to move. No one said anything at first, just exchanged glances, whispered quietly outside room 313. But the longer it continued, the harder it became to ignore. Nora noticed it too. She'd wake in the middle of the night, blankets slipping from her lap, and see Fenrir rigid, tail still, staring into that sliver of shadow. It made her heart race for reasons she couldn't explain. The dog never growled, never barked, but the tension in his body was enough. It felt like he was holding something back. Evie, meanwhile, was recovering. Her speech was slow but clear. Her color returned. She could sit up for short periods and even smile faintly when Nora brushed her hair. But something in her had changed. She'd go quiet for long stretches, eyes open, but looking somewhere else. And then came the drawings. It started with simple scribbles, but gradually became deliberate spirals, etched onto the edges of napkins and medical charts. She used her left hand, even though she'd always been right-handed. The symbols didn't match anything. Nora recognized not letters, not numbers, not art, just repeating curls, jagged shapes, odd clusters of slashes and hooks. And the words, soft murmurs Evie spoke while half asleep, not English, not anything. Nora recorded some and ran them through language apps. Nothing came back, just static and mismatches. That's when the lights began flickering. Not just the bulb above Evie's bed, but the hallway sconces, the emergency exit signs. And worse, the temperature dropped, regardless of the thermostat setting. Night nurses began bringing extra coats when walking that wing. One nurse, Maria, swore she heard breathing as she passed 313. Not labored, not human, just breath, right behind her. When she turned, no one was there. But Fenrir was already staring at the door, watching, waiting. 3:13 a.m. The clock on the wall let out a soft mechanical tick as the second hand slid into place unnoticed, except by the room. The storm outside had thickened into a white curtain. Wind clawed at the windows like restless fingers. Inside room 313, the stillness was so complete it felt unnatural. Too quiet. Even the machines seemed to hesitate between pulses. Nora had dozed off, slumped awkwardly in the recliner, arms still wrapped around her daughter's blanket. Evie lay sleeping, eyes fluttering beneath closed lids, breath shallow but steady. Fenrir sat at his usual post, shoulders tight, body forward, gaze locked on the dark corner of the room that never seemed to change, and yet, tonight, felt different. That's when the light above the bed blinked. Once. Twice. Then every light in the room stuttered, like something was interfering, pushing back. The monitor beside Evie beeped once, then screamed. Nora jolted awake. Evie? Her daughter's back arched off the mattress, arms stiff, fingers splayed. The convulsion hit like a wave. Monitors spiked, heart rate skyrocketed, oxygen plummeted. Evie! Nora leapt forward, fumbling for the call button. Then Fenrir moved. With a low, guttural snarl that didn't sound like a dog, he launched from the floor, his hackles raised, lips peeled back. His body twisted midair, lunging not at Evie, but toward the corner. There was nothing visible there, but that didn't matter. Fenrir hit the wall with such force it echoed. His claws scraped tile, his teeth snapped through the air, again and again. And in that corner, something shifted. The temperature plunged. The heart monitor cracked like static. Nora felt a sudden weight in the air, like pressure on her chest, something dense and wrong. Evie's eyes flew open, wide and white, but not focused on her mother. They stared past her, into the dark lips, moving in a silent scream. Then Fenrir let out a howl, not pain, not fear, war. The lights flickered wildly. One above shattered with a pop, sending shards to the floor. And then it stopped. All at once. The cold snapped away. The lights steadied. The machine slowed. Evie collapsed into her mother's arms, gasping like someone who had just surfaced from too long underwater. Nora held her close, heart pounding. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Evie, eyes fluttering shut, whispered into her mother's collar. It couldn't take me. Fenrir stood between the bed and the shadowed corner, panting. His chest rose and fell, his body trembling with the effort. But his eyes, still burning, never left that space. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside room 313, for the first time, the thing in the dark had been pushed back. The morning after the attack, Nora couldn't stop watching Evie breathe. Each rise and fall of her chest felt like a quiet miracle, fragile but undeniable. Fenrir hadn't moved from his post. His fur was still bristled in places, and though his body was resting, his eyes weren't. He was still watching the corner, unmoved by sunlight or human presence. That day, the doctors came in slower. They spoke softer. They didn't ask why there was a dog in the room anymore. They just made notes, monitored signs, adjusted medication, left quietly. Evie was awake now, truly awake but changed. She was calm, not afraid, not shaken, just still in a way that made Nora ache, like something had passed through her, and she was still sorting out where it had gone. Late that afternoon, as the storm raged on outside and room 313 dimmed again with the early winter dusk, Evie looked at her mother and asked, "Is it true that if you say something's name, it can't hurt you anymore?" Nora, taken aback, hesitated. "Where did you hear that?" Evie just blinked slowly. "I didn't hear it. No." Nora didn't know what to say. It was the kind of question that felt ancient, older than myths, older than science. And somehow, hearing it from her 8-year-old daughter made it feel more like fact than folklore. "Sometimes," Nora finally said, "names have power, especially the ones we're not supposed to say." Evie nodded, quiet again, but the look on her face told Nora that the answer had only confirmed what she already believed. That night, just after midnight, the cold returned. It was different this time, deeper, like something crawling through the vents. The temperature on the monitor didn't drop, but Nora could feel it in her bones, in her teeth. The air grew dense, charged. The lights dim, not flickering, just lowering as though the room was bracing itself. Fenrir stood up. No growl, no bark, just slow movement, smooth and exact. He placed himself once again between Evie and the darkened corner, his stance lower than usual, his body tense and waiting. Evie sat up, without a word. Nora moved to her side. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" Evie didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and laid a hand gently on Fenrir's head. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just remained perfectly still beneath her fingers. Then Evie opened her mouth and spoke. What came out wasn't English, wasn't anything Nora had ever heard. It was raw sound, like the groan of ice splitting on a lake, like stone breaking under pressure, like the sharp scream of wind racing through a long-forgotten cave. It wasn't a word. It was a name. The air in the room shuddered. The lights flickered, then surged. A crack sounded from somewhere behind the wall, like drywall snapping in protest. And Fenrir roared. Not a bark, not a howl, a roar primal, thunderous, unnatural in volume and power. It reverberated through the room, through the halls. Somewhere down the corridor, a nurse dropped a tray. The windows trembled. And then, silence. Not just quiet, absolute, broken silence. The air lightened. The cold vanished so completely it left Nora gasping from the sudden warmth. The light returned gentle and golden, like it had been held back for weeks. Evie fell back onto her pillow, drained but smiling. "It can't hide anymore," she whispered. Nora brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead, her hand trembling. "What did you say, Evie? What was that?" Evie didn't open her eyes. "Its name, the one it didn't want me to know." She shifted slightly toward Fenrir, her small fingers still curled in his fur. "It's not just darkness, Mom. It's the part that waits for you to forget who you are. But now it knows I remember." Nora couldn't find words. She just sat beside them, daughter and dog, staring into the now ordinary corner of the room where for the first time in weeks, nothing stared back. 3 days before discharge, just after lunch rounds, a nurse named Layla quietly stepped into room 313 with a manila envelope pressed tight to her chest. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching Evie sketch spirals on a paper napkin and Fenrir resting at her feet like a statue carved from snow and smoke. Finally, Layla looked at Nora. Her voice was low, unsure. "This was dropped off at the front desk this morning. No name, no return address. They thought it might be for you." Nora furrowed her brow and took the envelope. It was old-creased at the corners, the paper soft, like something that had been handled many times. Inside was a single photo. Faded, grainy, but unmistakable. It showed a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, standing in the snow outside what looked like the very same hospital. Her hands were bundled in wool mittens, and her smile was faint but unmistakably real. Beside her, sitting with regal stillness in the snow, was a dog. Not just any dog. Fenrir. Same silver coat, same sharp ears, same eyes that seemed to hold more time than a single life could explain. Nora's hands trembled. She turned the photo over. On the back, scrawled in soft pencil, nearly erased by age, were 7 words. Room 313. He saved her too. The breath left her lungs. Layla stood frozen. I asked around. An archivist pulled the old patient records. The girl's name was Julia. She was in a coma for weeks after a sledding accident. No brain activity, no response. Then one day, she woke up. No one knew why. She paused. The records say she drew symbols too. That night, after Evie had fallen asleep and Fenrir had resumed his silent post, Nora sat in the hallway with the hospital's night records manager, flipping through dusty patient files and half-lost microfiche notes. And the pattern emerged. Every 10 to 15 years, always in winter, always in room 313, a child deemed beyond saving. A mysterious dog with no owner, no origin. A recovery no one could explain. And each time, the same thing. He disappears. Nora leaned back, her mind spinning. He wasn't just here for Evie. He had done this before. And maybe he would do it again. The morning Evie was discharged, the snow finally stopped. After weeks of gray skies and white silence, Montana's sun broke through, spilling gold over the pines and casting long shadows on the iced-over parking lot. The world looked washed clean. Quiet, but not in the heavy way. Room 313 had been. This quiet felt earned, peaceful. Evie stood in the main hallway, wrapped in a thick pink coat 2 sizes too big. Her hair, now brushed and braided, peeked out beneath a beanie a nurse had knit for her. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes clearer. She looked like a child again, but not the same child who had been wheeled in 3 weeks earlier. At her side, as always, was Fenrir. He walked without leash or command, his head just slightly lower than hers, ears alert but calm. He didn't look back. He didn't seem to need to. Every step he took was confident, quiet, present, like he knew exactly where he was meant to be. Staff lined the hallway but didn't speak. They didn't applaud. They just stood still, some with hands pressed to their chests, others holding back tears they couldn't quite explain. Dr. Ramsey stepped forward, clipboard in hand, then stopped short. For the first time in 2 decades, he set it down. No final notes, no medication review, just a nod. She's stronger than we gave her credit for, he said quietly. You both are. Nora smiled, her eyes tired but peaceful. We had help. As they stepped toward the main doors, sunlight streaking through the glass, she looked down at Fenrir and asked the question that had lingered in her throat for days. Will he stay with us? And nearby Nurse June, the one who had first said, let him stay, smiled softly. He'll stay as long as she needs him. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. The air outside was crisp and alive. Birds called distantly in the trees. Somewhere, a snowplow scraped along the road like a slow exhale of the town itself. Evie paused just before the threshold. She turned, knelt beside Fenrir, and placed her forehead gently against his. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, in a whisper meant only for him, she said, I remember you too. Fenrir blinked slowly. Maybe he remembered her from another place. Maybe another time. Maybe in a story that had been told long before room 313 ever existed. They stepped into the light together. No leash, no words, just steps in sync. Like music you don't hear but know by heart. As they disappeared into the sunlit morning, Nora glanced back over her shoulder. Room 313 was just a room now quiet, unlit, nothing remarkable. And yet, somewhere deep in her chest, she knew the silence had changed. It was no longer waiting. Because sometimes, the thing that saves you doesn't come with sirens or answers. Sometimes, it just walks beside you through the dark, through the snow, through every room no one else dares to enter. And when the light returns, it doesn't ask for thanks. It simply stays until you no longer need it.